The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting golden light across the polished floors. Kate, the Princess of Wales, walked gracefully through her private quarters, her morning routine as elegant as everything else she did. She had just returned from a week-long royal tour in Scotland with Prince William, and she was looking forward to some quiet time at home. As she entered her dressing room, something felt different. Kate had an eye for detail, a quality that made her excellent at her royal duties. She paused, scanning the room carefully. The antique jewelry box on her dresser sat slightly askew, and the small glass cabinet where she kept her most treasured personal items seemed disturbed. Kate approached the cabinet slowly, her heart beginning to race. She opened the delicate glass door and immediately noticed the gaps. 3 items were missing. The vintage pearl brooch that had belonged to Princess Diana, a gift William had given her on their 10th anniversary. A small golden locket containing pictures of her children as babies, and most concerning of all, an emerald ring that had been in her family for 3 generations passed down from her grandmother. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked the rest of the room. Nothing else seemed to be missing, but these 3 items held immense sentimental value. Kate sat down on the velvet chair near her window, trying to process what this meant. The palace had strict security. Only family members and a handful of trusted staff had access to this private area. She immediately called William, who was in a meeting with palace officials. His voice came through the phone, warm and concerned. Kate explained the situation calmly, though William could hear the worry beneath her composed tone. He told her he would be there within 15 minutes and to not touch anything else in the room. True to his word, William arrived quickly, his expression serious. He hugged Kate and then examined the room with the careful attention of someone who understood the gravity of the situation. This was not just about stolen items. This was about a breach of trust within their own family circle. William called for James, the head of palace security, a distinguished man in his 50s who had served the royal family for over 20 years. James arrived within minutes, accompanied by his deputy. William explained the situation in measured tones, emphasizing that this matter needed to be handled with utmost discretion. The last thing they needed was for this incident to leak to the press. James examined the room professionally, taking notes on his tablet. He assured them that the palace had comprehensive security cameras that covered most corridors and common areas, though the private quarters themselves were not monitored to respect the family's privacy. However, anyone entering or leaving this wing would have been captured on camera. Kate provided detailed descriptions of the missing items, while William paced the room, his mind working through the possibilities. Who had access to this area? When could this have happened? The items must have been taken during their time in Scotland, which narrowed down the window to about 7 days. James promised to review all security footage from the past week and compile a list of everyone who had entered this wing of the palace. He estimated it would take several hours to go through all the recordings. William thanked him and asked for regular updates, no matter the time of day or night. After James left, Kate and William sat together in the quiet room. Kate admitted that what bothered her most was not the monetary value of the items, though some were quite valuable. It was the personal significance. These were pieces of her life, her family, her memories. The Diana brooch especially felt like a sacred trust that had been violated. William took her hand and promised they would get to the bottom of this. He suggested they keep this matter private for now, not even mentioning it to the children or other family members until they knew more. Kate agreed, though she wondered if perhaps someone in the family already knew something about this situation. That evening, James returned with his initial findings. He had reviewed the footage and found something interesting. 3 times during the week that William and Kate were away, someone had entered their private wing. The person was small in stature, moved quickly, and seemed to know exactly where the cameras were positioned, often keeping their face hidden. However, James had managed to capture a few clear frames. The figure appeared to be young, possibly a teenager wearing casual clothes that were expensive but not formal. What was most striking was a distinctive red jacket, with unique embroidered details that the person wore on 2 of the 3 visits. William studied the images carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. He asked James to make a list of all young people who had visited the palace during that week for any reason. Family gatherings, events, tours, everything. James nodded and said he would have that information by morning. That night, Kate could barely sleep. She kept thinking about who could have done this and why. The palace had always felt like a safe haven for their family, despite its public nature. Now that sense of security had been shattered. She wondered if they would ever feel the same way about their home again. William lay awake beside her, his mind racing through possibilities. He had a sinking feeling about this situation, the way the person moved, the knowledge of the palace layout, the timing of the visits. Everything pointed to someone who was familiar with the royal household. Someone who belonged there, at least peripherally. As dawn broke over London, William made a decision. He would handle this investigation personally. This was too sensitive, too close to family to leave entirely in the hands of security. Whatever they discovered, whatever consequences would follow, he would be the one to see it through to the end. Kate supported his decision, grateful that William was taking charge of such a delicate matter with his characteristic sense of duty and fairness. The following morning arrived with gray skies and drizzling rain, matching the somber mood inside Kensington Palace. William was already awake and dressed when Kate found him in his private study, surrounded by papers and security reports. He had dark circles under his eyes, evidence that he had spent most of the night reviewing every detail of the case. James arrived at 8 o'clock sharp with the comprehensive list William had requested. As they went through the names together, William's expression grew increasingly serious. During that week in early autumn, there had been several family gatherings at the palace. King Charles and Queen Camilla had hosted a small dinner. Several of the extended family members had stopped by for various reasons. One name on the list made William pause. Freddie, Camilla's 15-year-old grandson from her son Tom Parker Bowles. The young man had visited the palace twice that week, supposedly to see his grandmother and grandfather. William remembered meeting Freddie briefly at a family gathering a few months ago. He was a quiet teenager, intelligent but somewhat withdrawn, going through that difficult phase between childhood and adulthood. William asked James to pull up any footage of Freddie from that week. As they watched the recordings, William felt his heart sink. There was Freddie on Tuesday afternoon, wearing jeans and that distinctive red embroidered jacket. The same jacket from the security footage of the intruder. The timing matched perfectly with one of the incidents. Kate joined them in the study, bringing tea and biscuits that neither of them would touch. When William showed her the footage, she gasped softly. She remembered that jacket now. She had seen Freddie wearing it at a garden party over the summer. It was vintage, probably from his mother's collection, with unique gold and red thread embroidery of birds along the back. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. James tracked Freddie's movements through the palace on all 3 days. Each time the young man had arrived to see Camilla, spent time with her in the common areas, and then at some point he had slipped away. The cameras showed him heading toward the private wings, moving with purpose but also with clear nervousness in his body language. William sat back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. This was exactly the scenario he had feared. Family, not just any family member, but Queen Camilla's own grandson. The implications were enormous. This would devastate Camilla, create tension between the families, and if it leaked to the press, it would be a scandal of epic proportions. Kate spoke first, her voice gentle but firm. They needed to be absolutely certain before taking any action. William agreed. He asked James to investigate further. Were there any other young people who fit the description? Could someone else have borrowed or worn a similar jacket? James promised to check everything, though his expression suggested he believed they had found their culprit. Over the next 2 days, William continued the investigation quietly. He spoke privately with staff members who had been on duty during those dates, asking casual questions about who they had seen and what they remembered. Everyone confirmed that Freddie had been present on those specific days and had seemed somewhat distracted or anxious. One housekeeper, Maria, who had worked at the palace for 15 years, shared something particularly revealing. She had seen Freddie on Tuesday afternoon, looking flustered and guilty as he hurried out of the private wing. She had thought it odd at the time, but assumed he had simply gotten lost in the maze-like corridors of the palace. When she asked if he needed help finding his way, he had mumbled something and rushed past her. William thanked Maria for her honesty and asked her to keep this conversation confidential. She nodded solemnly, understanding the sensitivity of the situation. The royal household staff were trained to be discreet, and Maria had proven her loyalty time and again over the years. That evening, William and Kate sat together in their private sitting room, the stolen items weighing heavily on both their minds. Kate admitted she felt conflicted. If it was indeed Freddie, she wondered what could have driven a 15-year-old boy to steal from them. Was he in trouble? Did he need money? Was someone pressuring him? William shared her concerns. He remembered his own teenage years, the pressures and confusions of that age. But he also knew that actions had consequences, and theft from the royal family was a serious matter. Still, he wanted to understand the situation fully before deciding how to proceed. Perhaps there was more to this story than simple theft. The next morning, James presented his final report. After checking everything twice, cross-referencing all the evidence, the conclusion was clear. Freddie Parker Bowles was the only person who matched all the criteria. The timeline, the physical description, the distinctive jacket, the access to the palace, the nervous behavior, everything pointed to him. William made a decision. Before approaching Freddie directly, he needed to speak with his father, Tom Parker Bowles. It was only fair to give the family a chance to address this privately, before any official action was taken. However, he also needed to consider how to handle the situation with Camilla, who would be heartbroken by this revelation. That afternoon, William arranged a private meeting with Tom Parker Bowles at Clarence House, away from the palace and prying eyes. Tom arrived looking relaxed and friendly, completely unaware of the serious nature of the conversation ahead. William offered him tea and they sat in a quiet study overlooking the gardens. William began carefully, explaining that a sensitive matter had come to his attention involving Tom's son. As he laid out the evidence, he watched Tom's face transform from confusion to shock to devastation. Tom's hand shook as he looked at the security footage, recognizing his son immediately. He seemed to age 10 years in those few minutes. Tom was speechless at first, then the words came tumbling out. He had noticed Freddie acting strangely lately, more secretive, more withdrawn. He had assumed it was typical teenage behavior, perhaps issues at school or with friends. Never in his worst nightmares had he imagined something like this. He apologized profusely to William, his voice cracking with emotion. William listened with compassion, understanding that Tom was devastated not just by the theft itself, but by the betrayal of trust within the family. Tom asked what would happen next, his face pale with worry. William explained that he wanted to speak with Freddie directly, to understand why this had happened before deciding on any course of action. He emphasized that his priority was doing what was right while also protecting the family from public scandal. Tom agreed immediately, promising full cooperation. He would bring Freddie to the palace the following morning. As he stood to leave, Tom paused and asked William to please consider that Freddie was still just a child, despite his actions. William assured him that he would handle the situation with fairness and discretion, keeping Freddie's age and the family's reputation in mind throughout the process. The next morning felt heavy with anticipation. William had arranged for the meeting to take place in his private study at Kensington Palace, a room that was comfortable yet formal enough to convey the seriousness of the situation. Kate would be present as well, not as an interrogator but as a compassionate presence who might help the young man feel less intimidated. When Tom Parker Bowles arrived with Freddie at 10 o'clock, the difference in the boy was striking. The usual teenage swagger was completely absent. Freddie looked terrified, his face pale and his hands trembling. He kept his eyes on the floor as his father guided him into the study. It was clear that Tom had told him everything the night before. William greeted them calmly and gestured for everyone to sit. The atmosphere was tense but not hostile. Kate offered tea, which no one accepted. For a long moment there was silence. Freddie finally looked up and William could see tears pooling in the young man's eyes. Before anyone could say anything, Freddie spoke, his voice breaking. He said he was sorry. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. He said he knew what he had done was wrong, unforgivable even. He said he had been too scared to come forward, too ashamed to face what he had done. Tom put his hand on his son's shoulder, trying to offer comfort while clearly struggling with his own emotions. William listened carefully, his expression neutral but not unkind. When Freddie fell silent, exhausted by his confession, William asked the question that had been keeping him awake at night. Why? Why would Freddie take these items? He was not a child who lacked for anything. His family was well off. He attended an excellent school. He had every advantage in life. Freddie wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and began to explain. It started with his best friend Marcus, a boy he had known since primary school. Marcus came from a different background, a single mother who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. Despite their different circumstances, the boys had been inseparable for years. A few months ago, Marcus's mother had lost one of her jobs and was struggling to pay their rent. Marcus had confided in Freddie that they might have to move out of London, which would mean changing schools and leaving everything familiar behind. Freddie had been devastated by the thought of losing his best friend. He felt helpless, unable to fix the situation despite his privileged position. Then one day, while visiting his grandmother at the palace, Freddie had overheard some staff members talking about the value of various royal items. He learned that even small pieces from the royal collection could be worth thousands of pounds. A terrible idea had formed in his mind. What if he could take a few items, sell them quietly, and use the money to help Marcus's family? He had not thought it through, he admitted. He did not know how to sell valuable items without being caught. He did not consider that these were not just valuables but personal treasures with deep sentimental meaning. All he could think about was saving his friendship and helping someone he cared about. It was foolish, selfish, and wrong, but at the time it had seemed like the only solution he could think of. As Freddie spoke, Kate felt her anger softening. She saw before her not a criminal, but a confused child who had made a terrible decision while trying to help a friend. Still, she needed to know more. She asked Freddie if he still had the items. Had he sold them? Given them to Marcus? What had he done with Kate's precious belongings? Freddie shook his head vigorously. No, he still had everything. After taking the items, the reality of what he had done had hit him like a wave. He realized he could never actually sell them, never give them away. He had hidden them in his room at home, wrapped carefully in a cloth, too guilty to do anything with them but too afraid to return them. Every day since then had been torture, wondering when he would be caught. Tom confirmed this, explaining that he had found the items in Freddie's room after their conversation the previous night. He had brought them with him today, carefully packaged. He pulled out a small box from his bag and placed it on William's desk. Inside were all 3 items exactly as Kate had described them. The Diana brooch gleamed under the study lights. The golden locket was untarnished. The emerald ring sparkled as beautifully as ever. Kate picked up each item carefully, relief flooding through her. They were all there, undamaged, safe. She had been worried they might have been sold or lost forever. She looked at Freddie, seeing the genuine remorse in his young face. This was not the face of someone who stole for personal gain or malicious intent. This was a child who had made a catastrophic error in judgment. William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens while he collected his thoughts. The room remained silent, everyone waiting for his response. Finally, he turned back to face them. He began by acknowledging that what Freddie had done was indeed serious. Theft was theft, regardless of the motivation behind it. The breach of trust was significant, especially within a family. However, William continued, he also recognized that Freddie was still young, that his intentions, while misguided, had not been entirely selfish. The fact that he had not sold the items, that he had been carrying this guilt, that he was genuinely remorseful, these things mattered. William had seen true criminals in his various royal duties, people who showed no remorse, no understanding of the harm they caused. Freddie was not one of those people. Kate spoke next, her voice gentle but firm. She explained to Freddie that while she appreciated his desire to help his friend, there were proper ways to offer assistance. If he had come to his family, to his grandmother, to anyone, they could have found legitimate ways to help Marcus's family. The royal family regularly supported charitable causes and individuals in need. There were foundations, programs, resources that could have been utilized. Instead, Freddie had chosen to act alone, in secret, breaking the law and betraying trust in the process. Kate wanted him to understand that good intentions did not excuse bad actions. One did not steal to help others. One found ethical, legal ways to make a difference. This was an important lesson that Freddie needed to learn and remember for the rest of his life. Freddie listened to every word, nodding occasionally, clearly taking in the gravity of the situation. When Kate finished speaking, he looked directly at her and apologized again. But this time his apology was more thoughtful, more mature. He said he understood now how serious his actions were and how much pain and worry he had caused. He promised it would never happen again. Tom was visibly emotional throughout the conversation. He thanked William and Kate for their understanding and patience. He assured them that there would be consequences at home as well. Freddie would face restrictions on his freedom. He would work to understand the value of trust and honesty, and he would learn proper ways to help others. Tom was committed to making sure his son learned from this experience. William acknowledged Tom's words but said they needed to discuss what would happen next. The situation was complex, involving family dynamics, potential legal issues, and the question of what to tell other family members, particularly Camilla. These were questions that required careful thought and consideration. He suggested they all take some time to process what had been discussed before making any final decisions. After Tom and Freddie left the palace, William and Kate sat together in the quiet study, processing everything they had just heard. Kate held the recovered items in her hands, grateful to have them back, but unable to shake the image of Freddie's tear-stained face. William sat beside her, equally thoughtful. They both understood that the easy part was over. Now came the difficult decisions. Kate broke the silence first. She admitted that her initial anger had transformed into something more complex during the conversation. Yes, Freddie had violated their privacy and taken things that did not belong to him, but he had not sold them. He had not destroyed them. He had been paralyzed by guilt, unable to move forward with his misguided plan or to come forward and confess. In a strange way, that showed he still had a functioning conscience. William agreed, sharing that he had seen something of himself in Freddie's story. When William was young, not much older than Freddie was now, he had also struggled with the limitations of his position. He had wanted to help people, to make a real difference, but had often felt constrained by protocol and expectation. He had never stolen anything, of course, but he understood the frustration of seeing a problem and feeling powerless to solve it in a straightforward way. They discussed Marcus, Freddie's friend who had been at the center of this entire situation without even knowing it. Kate suggested that perhaps they could arrange for proper help for Marcus's family through legitimate channels. It would not excuse what Freddie had done, but it would address the underlying problem that had motivated him in the first place. William thought this was an excellent idea and made a note to look into it. The conversation then turned to the most delicate aspect of the situation. Queen Camilla. She had to be told what had happened. Her grandson had committed theft within the royal household, had betrayed the trust of the family. This news would devastate her. She adored her grandchildren and took great pride in their behavior and accomplishments. Learning that Freddie had done something like this would break her heart. William decided he would be the one to tell her, preferably before the end of the day. Delaying would only make things worse, and Camilla deserved to hear the truth from him, rather than from rumors or second-hand accounts. Kate offered to accompany him, but William felt this was a conversation he needed to have alone, as the future king dealing with a matter of royal household security and family trust. That afternoon, William drove to Clarence's house where Camilla was working on her correspondence. She greeted him warmly, always delighted to see her stepson. They sat in her comfortable sitting room, filled with family photographs and fresh flowers from the garden. William's serious expression quickly alerted her that this was not a social visit. As gently as he could, William explained what had happened. He watched Camilla's face change as he spoke, seeing shock, disbelief, and then crushing sadness wash over her features. She put her hand to her mouth when he showed her the security footage, immediately recognizing Freddie in his distinctive jacket. Tears filled her eyes as the full reality of the situation became clear. Camilla's first words were an apology to William and Kate. She felt responsible for Freddie's actions, as if his behavior reflected some failure on her part as a grandmother. William quickly reassured her that no one blamed her. Children made mistakes, sometimes serious ones, regardless of how well they were raised or how much love they received. Freddie's choices were his own. They talked for over an hour about Freddie, about his personality, his friendships, his recent changes in behavior that Camilla had noticed but not fully understood. She mentioned that Freddie had seemed distracted during his recent visits, less engaged in their conversations. She had attributed it to typical teenage moodiness, never imagining he was carrying such a heavy secret. William explained Freddie's reasoning, the situation with Marcus and his family, the misguided attempt to help a friend in need. Camilla listened carefully, and while she did not excuse her grandson's actions, she could see the human complexity behind them. She acknowledged that Freddie had always been a sensitive child, deeply affected by the problems of others, perhaps sometimes too deeply for his own good. She asked what would happen now. Would there be police involvement? Would this become public? Would Freddie face legal consequences? Her voice shook as she asked these questions, clearly terrified of the possible outcomes. William explained that he and Kate had not decided on a final course of action yet. They wanted to handle this matter thoughtfully, considering all the factors involved. However, William did share that his instinct was to keep this matter within the family if possible. Freddie was young, genuinely remorseful, and the items had been recovered undamaged. Involving the police or making this public would destroy the young man's future and create a scandal that would hurt everyone involved. Still, there had to be consequences, real ones that would ensure Freddie understood the gravity of his actions. Camilla expressed her gratitude for William's compassion and wisdom in handling such a difficult situation. She promised that she and Charles would also ensure appropriate consequences within the family. She suggested that perhaps Freddie could benefit from speaking with a counselor or therapist, someone who could help him process what had happened and develop better judgment for the future. William thought this was an excellent idea. He also proposed that Freddie might benefit from structured volunteer work with charitable organizations, learning proper ways to help people in need. This would serve multiple purposes. It would be a form of service as consequence for his actions. It would teach him legitimate ways to make a difference, and it would help him develop empathy and understanding in a more mature, responsible way. Before William left, Camilla asked if she could speak with Kate directly, to apologize personally. William promised to arrange it, knowing that Kate would be gracious and understanding. As he drove back to Kensington Palace, William reflected on how complicated family relationships could be, especially in the unique context of the royal family where personal matters often intersected with public duty. That evening, William shared the details of his conversation with Camilla with Kate. She listened carefully, moved by Camilla's distress and grateful for her willingness to take responsibility and work toward a solution. Kate agreed to meet with Camilla the following day, understanding that this personal connection would be important for healing the rift this incident had created. As they prepared for bed that night, Kate mentioned something that had been on her mind. She wondered if perhaps this incident, as painful as it was, might actually strengthen their extended family relationships in the long run. It had forced everyone to confront difficult truths, to communicate honestly, to work together toward resolution. These were valuable lessons that went beyond the immediate situation. William agreed, though he added that he hoped they would not need many more such lessons. They both laughed quietly at that, a release of tension after days of stress and difficult conversations. They were not finished dealing with this situation, not by far, but they had made progress. The items were recovered, the truth was known, and everyone involved seemed committed to moving forward in a constructive way. In his room across London, Freddie lay awake, replaying the meeting in his mind. He felt humiliated by what he had done, terrified of what might still happen, but also strangely relieved. The secret had been eating away at him for weeks. Now it was out in the open. The consequences would come, he knew that, but at least he would not have to carry the guilt alone anymore. He thought about his friend Marcus, wondering how he could help in a better way. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start figuring that out. The next morning brought a gentle autumn sunshine that seemed to promise better days ahead. Kate met with Queen Camilla at Clarence House in a private sitting room where they could talk without interruption. Camilla looked tired, as if she had not slept well, and Kate could see the emotional toll this situation had taken on the older woman. Before Camilla could begin her prepared apology, Kate reached across and took her hand. She told Camilla that she understood this was not her fault. Children and teenagers made mistakes, sometimes serious ones, and those mistakes reflected their own choices, not the quality of their upbringing or the love they received from their family. Camilla's eyes filled with tears at Kate's kindness and understanding. They talked about Freddie, sharing observations and memories. Camilla described him as a thoughtful child who sometimes struggled with the complexities of the world around him. He felt things deeply, perhaps too deeply. She mentioned that he had been particularly affected by documentaries about poverty and inequality that he had watched at school. His teacher had even commented that Freddie seemed unusually disturbed by social justice issues for someone his age. Kate found this information illuminating. It helped explain why Freddie had been so desperate to help Marcus's family. He was not just trying to save a friendship, but responding to a deep sense of injustice that he did not yet have the maturity or tools to address properly. This understanding did not excuse his actions, but it did provide context that would be important in deciding how to move forward. Kate shared her and William's preliminary thoughts about consequences and paths forward. She explained their idea about structured volunteer work and counseling. She also mentioned their plan to quietly assist Marcus's family through proper charitable channels, not as a reward for Freddie's actions, but as a way to address the underlying situation that had troubled him so much. Camilla listened carefully and expressed her support for these approaches. She added that she and Charles had discussed additional measures. Freddie would write formal letters of apology to both William and Kate. Not just quick notes, but thoughtful reflections on what he had done and why it was wrong. He would also be temporarily banned from visiting the palaces unless absolutely necessary for official family events, helping him understand that privileges came with responsibilities. Furthermore, Camilla explained that Tom had already arranged for Freddie to begin sessions with a family therapist who specialized in working with young people. The first appointment was scheduled for the following week. Tom was also implementing consequences at home, including restrictions on Freddie's free time and a requirement that he earn back his parents' trust through consistent good behavior and honesty. As they talked, Kate felt the tension between them dissolving. This meeting was not just about discussing Freddie's situation, but about two women in the royal family supporting each other through a difficult family crisis. They were different in many ways, came from different generations and backgrounds, but they were united in their love for their family and their commitment to handling the situation with grace and wisdom. Before Kate left, Camilla asked one more favor. She wanted to meet with Freddie along with William and Kate all together before any final decisions were made. She felt it was important for Freddie to see that the entire family was united in their response to his actions, that there was no division or taking of sides. Kate promised to arrange it, recognizing the wisdom in this approach. 2 days later, the meeting took place at Kensington Palace. Present were William, Kate, Camilla, Tom, and Freddie. King Charles had wanted to attend but had official duties he could not postpone. However, he had sent a personal letter to Freddie that would be shared during the meeting. The atmosphere was serious but not oppressive, more like a family gathering to address a serious matter than a trial. William began by acknowledging that everyone in the room cared about Freddie and wanted what was best for him. This meeting was not about punishment for its own sake, but about learning, growth, and restoration of trust. He explained that they had collectively decided not to involve the police or make this matter public. However, this decision came with the expectation that Freddie would take full responsibility for his actions and commit to the consequences they had outlined. Kate then read aloud from a list they had prepared. First, Freddie would begin volunteer work with a charity that helped families in financial difficulty, learning proper ways to assist people in need. Second, he would continue with counseling sessions to work through the thought patterns that had led to his poor decision. Third, he would write detailed letters of apology and reflection. Fourth, his palace visiting privileges would be suspended for 6 months, after which they would be reviewed. Camilla then read the letter from King Charles. It was kind but firm, expressing disappointment in Freddie's actions but also faith in his ability to learn from this experience. Charles wrote about his own mistakes as a young person and how he had learned that true nobility came not from titles or privilege but from character, integrity, and the willingness to admit when one was wrong. The letter ended with an expression of love and support. Freddie listened to everything with his head bowed, occasionally wiping his eyes. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was quiet but steady. He thanked everyone for not giving up on him, for choosing to help him become better rather than simply punishing him. He acknowledged that he had a lot of work to do to earn back their trust, and that he understood why these consequences were necessary and fair. He also asked if he could do something for Marcus's family through the proper channels once the charity work was set up. He wanted to be involved in helping them, but this time in a legitimate, transparent way. William and Kate agreed that this could be arranged as part of his volunteer work, once he had demonstrated his commitment to the program. The meeting concluded with a somewhat surprising gesture from Kate. She brought out the Diana brooch, the item that had meant the most to her personally. She showed it to Freddie and explained its history, the connection to William's mother, the memories it represented. She wanted him to understand that these were not just valuable objects but treasures filled with love and history. Freddie listened with wide eyes, clearly moved by her willingness to share something so personal with him after what he had done. As everyone prepared to leave, there was a sense of resolution in the air. The road ahead would not be easy for Freddie. He would have to work hard to rebuild trust and prove that he had learned from this experience. But he would not be alone. His family, the entire extended royal family, would be there to support him, guide him, and hold him accountable as needed. Tom thanked William and Kate privately as they were leaving, his gratitude evident in every word. He knew that the decision to handle this privately rather than publicly had protected not just Freddie but the entire family from a potentially devastating scandal. He promised that he would do everything in his power to ensure Freddie honored the commitments made today. That evening, as William and Kate sat together reviewing the events of the day, they felt a cautious optimism. The situation had been handled as well as it could be under difficult circumstances. Freddie had a clear path forward. The family relationships had been preserved, and important lessons had been learned by everyone involved, not just the young man who had made the mistake. Kate looked at her recovered treasures now safely back in their proper place. She realized that the experience had taught her something too. Material objects, no matter how precious or valuable, were ultimately less important than family bonds and the capacity for forgiveness and growth. The items had been recovered, but more importantly, a young person had been given a chance to learn and improve rather than being destroyed by one terrible mistake. 3 months passed quietly at Kensington Palace and throughout the extended royal family. The incident that had shaken them all was now being handled privately, with dignity, and with a focus on healing and growth rather than punishment alone. True to his word, Prince William had concluded the case without police involvement, without public scandal, and without destroying a young person's future over one terrible mistake. Freddie had thrown himself into his volunteer work with unexpected dedication. He worked 2 afternoons each week at a charity that provided support to families facing financial hardship. His supervisors reported that he was thoughtful, hardworking, and genuinely interested in learning how to help people effectively. The experience was transforming his understanding of poverty and privilege in ways that no lecture or documentary ever could. Through his volunteer work, Freddie had been able to connect Marcus's family with resources that made a real difference. Marcus's mother received job training assistance, help with her rent arrears through proper charitable channels, and support in finding a better-paying job. The family situation had stabilized, and Marcus was no longer facing the prospect of moving away. Freddie had achieved his original goal of helping his friend, but this time through legitimate means that he could be proud of. The counseling sessions were also proving valuable. Freddie was learning to understand his own thought processes, to recognize when his desire to help others was becoming destructive or misguided. His therapist was teaching him tools for managing strong emotions and making better decisions under pressure. Tom reported that his son seemed more mature, more thoughtful, and more willing to ask for guidance when facing difficult situations. The letters of apology that Freddie had written to William and Kate were remarkable documents. They were not perfunctory notes dashed off to fulfill a requirement. Instead, they were thoughtful, detailed reflections on what he had done, why it was wrong, and what he was learning from the experience. Kate kept her letter in a private drawer, occasionally reading it when she needed a reminder that people could change and grow, even after serious mistakes. The 6-month ban on palace visits was being observed strictly, though it was harder on Camilla than on anyone else. She missed seeing her grandson during her regular time at the palace, though she visited him at his home and kept in close contact. She understood that the consequence was necessary and fair, but that did not make it any easier. Still, she could see the positive changes in Freddie, and that gave her hope and comfort. William had officially closed the case in his private records, noting that all items were recovered, Restitution was made through community service and personal growth work, and the matter was resolved to the satisfaction of all parties involved. He had handled it exactly as he hoped to handle difficult situations when he eventually became king, with justice tempered by mercy, and consequences balanced with compassion. The incident had changed the dynamics within the extended royal family in subtle but important ways. There was a new awareness of the pressures facing the younger generation, the children and teenagers growing up in the unusual circumstances of royal life. William and Kate had begun discussions about creating better support systems for all the young people in the family, resources they could turn to when facing difficulties or confusion. The relationship between William's family and Camilla's family had actually strengthened through this crisis. The way they had all come together, communicated honestly, and worked toward a solution had created new bonds of trust and respect. Tom particularly felt grateful for how William and Kate had handled the situation, and he made sure to express that gratitude through his ongoing cooperation and support. One afternoon in early winter, Kate was organizing her jewelry and came across the 3 items that Freddie had taken. She held each one, thinking about how much had happened since she first discovered they were missing. The fear and anger she had felt then seemed distant now, replaced by a sense of perspective and even gratitude for the unexpected lessons the experience had taught her. She thought about Freddie and how he was doing. According to the latest reports from Tom and Camilla, he was thriving. His grades at school had improved, he was more engaged with his family, and he was already talking about possibly working in the nonprofit sector when he was older. The boy who had made such a serious mistake was becoming a young man with a clearer sense of purpose and stronger moral foundation. William walked into the room and found Kate lost in thought, the jewelry in her hands. He asked if she was okay, and she smiled at him. She told him she was just thinking about how complicated family could be, how challenging and messy and surprising, but also how ultimately rewarding when everyone chose to act with love and wisdom rather than anger and pride. William agreed, sharing that he had been reflecting on the same things. He admitted that there had been moments during the investigation when he was tempted to handle things more severely, to make an example that would deter future problems. But he was glad he had resisted that impulse. The goal was not to frighten people into good behavior, but to help them understand why good behavior mattered and give them tools to make better choices. As Christmas approached, William made a decision. The 6-month ban on palace visits would end right before the holiday season. He wanted Freddie to be able to attend the family Christmas gathering at Sandringham, to feel fully welcomed back into the family fold. He had earned that restoration of privilege through his hard work, his growth, and his commitment to change. When Tom received the news, he called William immediately to express his thanks. He shared that Freddie had been worried he would miss Christmas with the extended family, and that this gesture of inclusion would mean everything to him. William emphasized that Freddie had earned this through his own efforts, and that everyone was proud of the progress he had made. The Christmas gathering at Sandringham was joyful and warm that year. When Freddie arrived with his family, he was nervous but hopeful. Kate greeted him with genuine warmth, asking about his volunteer work and his studies. William shook his hand firmly, treating him with the respect due to a young man who had faced his mistakes and worked to become better. Camilla watched the interactions with tears in her eyes, grateful beyond words for the compassion and wisdom her family had shown. King Charles put his hand on her shoulder, understanding without words what this moment meant to her. Their family was whole again, stronger even than before because they had weathered a serious crisis together with grace and love. Later that evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Freddie found a moment to speak privately with Kate. He thanked her again for giving him a second chance, for believing that he could do better. Kate told him that everyone deserved the opportunity to learn from their mistakes, and that she expected great things from him in the future. She could see in his eyes that he took those words seriously, that he was determined to prove worthy of the faith his family had shown in him. As the year came to an end and a new one began, the incident at Kensington Palace had become part of the family's private history. It was a reminder that even in the most privileged circumstances, people faced challenges and made mistakes. What mattered was not perfection, but the willingness to acknowledge errors, accept consequences, work toward improvement, and extend forgiveness when it was earned. Prince William had handled the case exactly as he intended to handle many difficult situations in the future as king. He had balanced justice with mercy, consequences with compassion, and privacy with accountability. Most importantly, he had remembered that behind every mistake was a human being capable of growth and change. The treasures that Freddie had taken were safely restored. But the real treasure was the lesson learned by everyone involved about the power of redemption, the importance of family, and the possibility of second chances when they were truly earned.